In today's video, I put two wooden planks together, I cast concrete blocks, and lastly, I paint the nose. Hello fellow modelers, I recently finished two small models. One is German Comet aircraft and the other is small Jeep Willys. Now it's time to end this series and create a diorama for them. I'm starting with a balsa wood frame, because it's a lightweight and easy to cut material. For the base I have chosen extruded polystyrene, and I have set the dimensions to 13 by 18 cm. Since it is 7 to the scale, there is plenty of room for all the elements I want to include. My first attempt was to apply a layer of gypsum plaster to create a concrete airfield, but I struggled to achieve a smooth finish, therefore I decided to scrap the base and try a different approach. I decided to create a template for concrete blocks, which I printed using a filament printer. To secure the frame to the cutting pad, I find it handy to use PVA glue due to its flexibility. I opt for grey gypsum plaster because it sets relatively quickly and requires only water. However, it's important to note that when it dries, it's fragile, allowing scalping or slight damage. I apply a small amount of the plaster into the template and smooth it out with a metal trowel. It's crucial to ensure that the plaster reaches into all corners. The template is just a plastic sprue, so cutting out the frame is necessary for proper separation. I use PVA glue to attach the blocks. Instead of applying them directly to the center, I place them at slight angle. This approach gives the diorama a less symmetrical look, making it more visually appealing. It's now more challenging to cut the blocks to the needed shape, and is also handy to unify the frame edges. The plaster is fragile, so correct the shape is not difficult. You can use plaster for creating concrete bunkers or buildings, allowing you to implement various interesting and realistic damage effects. I use packaging knife to align the edges of a balsa frame. The concrete airfield looks dull, so I have decided to add a vegetation. I am mixing material for the ground, which includes water, plaster, sawdust, PVA glue and dry pigment. If you are aiming for a rougher texture finish, simply add more sawdust to the mix. I must let the ground dry properly, and my free time I can paint the concrete. The plaster is grey, but it's too light. The primer helps to fix the plaster so the surface will be more resilient against scratches. Then I change the grey shade slightly with acrylic light grey paint, since the primer has a blue tone. Now I'm adding some shading to break up the uniformity of the surface. I'm applying a dark grey around the pan lines. There is no need for precision here, a random effect is most suitable. The texture looks nice, but it could use a few more details. A sponge and a bit of acrylic paint will do the trick. Just tap the sponge on the surface randomly to create a soft stains. I prefer using brown paint because it offers nice color contrast. The sponge creates a large and inconsistent stains, but for a fine texture, this technique is better. Apply a small amount of acrylic paint on the brush, then blow away small drops from fibers with an airbrush. This technique simulates small stones, dirt or holes in the concrete, making the surface appear less uniform. Now let's move on filling the pan lines with a fine sand. I usually gather the sand from local forest, but you can also purchase it from a railroad model shop. I have secured the sand using pigment fixer, but I have found that the diluted PVA glue works even better. Let's dive into creating some vegetation. I'm starting by applying a layer of PVA glue, and it's best to use a PVA glue with a matte finish when it dries. Now I'm applying static grass. I have a static grass applicator, but it creates a too uniform layer, so I prefer a small plastic bottle and fingers. I initially used 4mm long fibers, but to add more depth I also used longer 6mm fibers. To break up the uniformity, since I'm not going for an English garden vibe, I carefully adjusted the grass with tweezers. Do not forget to add some turfs to the pan lines. To enhance the diversity of the vegetation, adding different bushes is really useful. I have got these lovely trees from Diorama Presepe. A good diorama follows basic principles. For example, it's handy to include a significant vertical element. While I do not have a room for hanger or so, I do see an opportunity to add a small tree. In the box are bushes, so I must glue them together and make a decent tree. I use superglue and an accelerator for even faster attachment. This diorama is set in spring, so I am opting for a light, bright green shade for the vegetation. We can make the vegetation even wilder with the bushes and small flowers. I am focusing on shaping the transition between the concrete and the grass. Since it is an abandoned airfield, I want to add more detail to the ground using a mix of PVA glue and soft sand. I have mixed a wash for pigment and pigment fixer, which I am applying to the pan lines and concrete. When it dries, it creates a lovely dry mud and dirt effect. Additionally, dark dry pigment will help to create the illusion of a fresh ground. I realized I should have unified the concrete blocks of a frame before painting. To fix this, I used acrylic putty and smoothed the area with a sandpaper. The final step is to cover the frame with a black paint, and then the diorama will be complete. However, something seems to be missing. Yes, the figures are what truly brings the scene to life and adds story. I cannot just use any ordinary miniatures, since the Comet and Jeep are detail models. I found and purchased lovely 35 scale 3D printable figures. I only rescale them to 72 scale and print them. I'm not particularly skilled at painting miniatures or sculpting, so I need figures with delicate details that make the painting process easier and more enjoyable. I use black and white shading. Since the figures are small, it will optically highlight the details. The size of the head is only 2 mm, so without magnifying glass or microscope, achieving any shading can be quite challenging. I like this Army Painter speed paint, which is partly transparent and highly diluted paint. You simply apply it to the face figure and let it dry. If the face has some details and it is not a potato, it creates a nice shading. You can use speed paints for the whole figure, but I use them only for the face. I use Vallejo acrylic paints, as they work perfectly with a paintbrush. And I thin the paint with water and bit of acrylic thinner, which helps create a smoother layer. The effect appears strong initially, but once it dries, it becomes almost unnoticeable. Now I must paint the highlights meticulously with a sharp paintbrush. If you have a steady hand, you can also try to highlight the face, but be careful, you can easily ruin it. The detail matters, therefore I'm trying to paint the airborne patch. I painted 2 resting US Army soldiers, who discovered the abandoned comet. Then 2 airborne soldiers who arrived in the jeep to see what their fellow had found. The Yellow 15 comet was one of the few survivors from World War II, and now sits on display in the museum in Scotland. You can notice how the diorama has changed with these new figures. I have designed a large set of printable bottles, which are available for my patrons or on Gal 3D. You can print them using a clear resin to enhance the diorama with details like beer, water or wine bottles. With these added touches, the diorama is now complete. It's wonderful to see all the elements come together. Thank you all for watching and heartfelt thanks to my Patreons for their incredible support. See you next time!